New UFO files released, fraud investigations in various states, and America's talking. This is the Center Square Daily for Friday, May 8th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. The Pentagon just released a new batch of 161 files related to disclosure of what some say is evidence of alien life, or interdimensional beings, or even top secret military projects. You could spend all weekend looking through the scores of videos, images, including ones from the moon taken by NASA astronauts, and PDFs related to unidentified flying objects, or as they're being referred to by some officials, as unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Secretary of the Department of War, Pete Hegseth, said in a statement with today's release that the Department of War is in lockstep with President Trump to bring unprecedented transparency regarding our government's understanding of unidentified anomalous phenomenon. He goes on to say that these files, hidden behind classifications, have long fueled justification, and it's time to have the American people see it for themselves. He further said, this release of declassified documents demonstrates the Trump administration's earnest commitment to unprecedented transparency. Now, while other previously released UFO files are archived at aaro.mil, the first trove of files released by the War Department at war.gov/UFO touch on incidents from around the world and, yes, even from the moon. Among the oldest documents in the collection comes from a January 9th, 1950 report to the Air Materiel Command with the subject, Unidentified Flying Objects. The Department of War says that 143-page document compiles UFO reports throughout 1949. Another document from 1948 relates to the earlier reporting of flying objects and flying saucers. Now, it's not just old documents, digitized for all to read. There are plenty of pictures and even video from around the world labeled as unresolved UAP reports. Many of those videos come through the lens of highly sophisticated imaging equipment used by defense intelligence, locking onto some kind of phenomenon, moving at speeds not known to be achievable by contemporary propulsion systems. And it's not just the incredible speeds the objects are moving, but the tight turns and trajectories of the objects that seem to defy physics. There's even audio from 1965's Gemini 7 mission, where astronaut Frank Borman reports to NASA Mission Control in Houston his sighting of an unidentified object, which he referred to as a bogey.
So we have a bogey at 10 o'clock high.
Roger. Gemini 7, is that the booster or is that an actual sighting?
What?
Say again, 7?
Okay, we have several, looks like the 3 up here, actual sighting.
You have any more information, estimated distance or size?
We also have the booster in sight.
Understand you also have the booster in sight, Roger.
And we have very, very many, it looks like hundreds of little particles going by the left out about 3 to 4 miles.
Understand you have many small particles going by on the left. At what distance?
4 miles. Large, looks like perhaps a vehicle that's disintegrated.
Again, an astronaut out in space telling Mission Control that they see part of their booster, but they also see a bogey and even what looks like could be disintegrated pieces of something 3 or 4 miles away from their craft in space. But what exactly is going on here? Why are these files being released now? Is it a ploy to distract from high gas prices, the conflict in the Middle East, or even the Epstein files? Or is it simply a response from the Trump administration to the growing calls from members of Congress briefed on such phenomenon, demanding the public has a right to know? There's plenty of postulation on those possibilities. While these questions are important, maybe just as important, if not more, is how much you, the taxpayer, may be paying for some of this. A nearly 40-year-old article in Washington Monthly, archived at CIA.gov, titled The Dark Secret of the Black Budget, discusses how back in 1987, then $35 billion in defense programs was considered invisible and asserting that it's hurting national security. Now, that article says that there have always been programs and certain types of weapon systems that were so top secret that public hearings were deemed inappropriate. For example, prior to 1987, such spending was used for advanced technical fighters like the stealth bomber and various types of satellite programs. Now, the article also gives mention to kamikaze dolphins as part of the CIA's Marine Mammal Project to, quote, train dolphins as underwater kamikazes. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth Tuesday, during a press briefing, he responded to questions about kamikaze dolphins being utilized in the Strait of Hormuz.
I can't confirm or deny whether we have kamikaze dolphins, but I can confirm they don't.
But spending on secret programs jumped nearly tenfold in 1987. Reportedly, more than 2/3 of the money is hidden in research, developments, and procurements. Some of that taxpayer spending may be within programs operated by the National Intelligence Program and the Military Intelligence Program. Today, a significant portion of the more than $850 billion military budget, line items for NIP and MIP, total about $115.5 billion. Now, that's roughly a 360 to 425% increase from 1987. Is all of that part of the so-called black budget? Whatever the spending's for, taxpayers should know that comes out to around $1 of every $12 spent for military spending, not having much, if any, oversight for those who are writing the checks. Again, you, the U.S. taxpayer. Now, the CIA archived Washington Monthly article from 1987 notes information about such programs so compartmentalized, with virtually no supervision, fewer supervisors, fewer auditors, and fewer people looking over fewer shoulders, raising alarms about waste. Now, as President Donald Trump looks to spend $1.5 trillion for the military budget for the next fiscal year, an annual increase of 42%, questions will continue to come in about accountability to the taxpayer who are funding all of this, especially if some have noted the Department of War failed its 8th consecutive audit in December 2025. Now, last June, the Department of War told Congress that it would be able to successfully account for all of its spending and assets by 2028. Does that include the so-called black budget? And how much of that went into compiling UAP evidence, or even housing, reverse engineering, and studying craft from out of this world or from deep in the ocean? Time will tell as more disclosure of UFO and UAP sightings continue to come out, and as Congress learns more about all of the taxpayer spending involved in such activities. And now to talk about the states that are pressing fraud charges and some ongoing investigations about how your tax dollars may be being abused is the Center Square reporter, Elise Apel. Elise, a lot of attention's been on Ilhan Omar for quite some time, but they're looking in Minnesota to try to get some information and even trying to subpoena her. But this story you put out there at thecentersquare.com, we've got some updates to discuss. Tell us about the latest there.
Yeah, so earlier this week, Democrats voted against, in a House fraud committee there in the state, Democrats voted against Republican efforts to subpoena Representative Ilhan Omar. They were trying to get documents between her and some convicted fraudsters in the Feeding Our Future fraud investigation. So Republicans are asking for these documents. Ilhan Omar, representative, she has not responded to any of their requests. Her office has ghosted them. They've heard zero responses. They've asked her to come testify. They haven't heard anything from her. And so now, just this morning, it was announced the Republican Chair Committee, Representative Kristen Robbins, is actually asking U.S. Congress to step in and force Ilhan Omar to send over those documents to them.
Yeah, it's really fascinating when you have a state legislative body wanting to look at one of their state's members of Congress. All right, you don't really see that too much, where the state legislature is starting to pick up some stones and look into some closets and whatnot of members of Congress. So I would imagine that that's an interesting dynamic that's kind of elevating this issue even more, a jurisdictional question, right?
Right. Well, and that was kind of Democrats on the point. That was their point on the committee. They were like, this is unprecedented. We have never subpoenaed a sitting member of Congress for documents as a state committee. So that was their point, but Republicans are pointing out, this level of fraud is unprecedented. The alleged connections between Representative Ilhan Omar and these convicted fraudsters is unprecedented. So they're really trying to seek answers on that.
Let's talk a little bit about what exactly is at the root of this, right? I mean, there's obviously the drama that we're seeing unfold of this jurisdictional question and, state legislature wanting to look into a member of Congress. But talk about the Feeding Our Futures fraud that has some convictions. How much are we talking about of taxpayer dollars being abused here, and what happened?
Yeah, so we're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars. So tens of millions of dollars that were allegedly lost through this Feeding Our Future program. So this was a congressional program that then received additional funding during COVID-19. And so the question that Republicans have for Representative Ilhan Omar is she actually passed some legislation that took down some of the guardrails around this program that were protecting the program from some cases of fraud. Now, Representative Omar argued, well, this was needed during COVID to make sure that everyone was getting the food that they needed through this program. Everyone was being fed that was intended to be fed by this program. But Republicans are saying, why did you intentionally take down some of these guardrails that were protecting this program from fraud, while also, being in communication with some of the people that were then convicted of this fraud? So that's kind of the deeper underlying issue. A program that received a lot of funding during COVID, and then at the same time, Representative Omar was taking down some of the guardrails around that program, and Republicans are just asking why, and trying to figure out, and that's what they're trying to receive, is the communications between her and the people that were in charge of implementing this program at kind of the local level and have now since been convicted of fraud. That's what they're really trying to figure out, is what was her level of communication with them and what were they talking about in these emails.
Well, and the idea of an elected official allegedly being involved in some kind of fraudulent activity, that's clearly much different than, say, just some random person who's not an elected official or in government who might have done some fraudulent activity around the Paycheck Protection Program during COVID-19.
Right, and I mean, in federal prosecutors, they've called the Feeding Our Future case one of the largest pandemic era fraud schemes. So we're talking like $250 million, and Republicans are asking, okay, where did that go, and what relationship did our elected representative have with those fraudsters?
Now, another story where states and prosecutors, they're looking to go after, these types of instances to hold people accountable for the misuse or alleged misuse of tax dollars. And we got a story out of Michigan. And this is somebody who is actually an official of some capacity on a board that's now charged with 16 felonies. Tell us what we know about Faye Baydoun in Michigan.
Yeah, so Faye Baydoun, she was a former member of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So basically that's, a corporation that is funded by the state and helps, different businesses kind of produce, help local economies, and they give subsidies, taxpayer-funded subsidies to different businesses throughout Michigan. So she's been charged, like you said, with 16 felonies tied to the alleged misuse of a $20 million state grant that was awarded to her nonprofit called Global Link International by Medic while she was a sitting member of the committee. And so she was a deciding factor in, the funding going to this nonprofit. That $20 million was given to this nonprofit, and it was used for all kinds of crazy things. They've talked about a coffee maker. That was kind of one of the big stories, that, a $600 coffee maker was one of the big receipts that was used. It was kind of a pivot point. This has been an ongoing story for a number of years. The Center Square has been on top of it, reporting on it for a number of years. But just this week, they finally announced criminal charges against Faye Baydoun. Attorney General Dana Nessel called this. She said, we allege that Faye Baydoun sought and received $20 million, operating a criminal enterprise, and lied repeatedly on how she actually used those funds. So this is just another case that we're seeing all across the nation of massive, massive levels of fraud.
Again, during the COVID-19 pandemic, tons of tax dollars infused into the economy through the Paycheck Protection Program Fund. It was really meant to help small businesses keep their employees on after local governments and state governments said, no, you can't have your business operate. But there was a rampant abuse in the unemployment system. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars misspent by, given to people who were employed. Then you get into other instances of these types of grants. And again, as we said, I mean, it's one thing when, somebody on the street is charged with fraud. It's another thing when either an elected official or somebody appointed to an official board actually is alleged to have done these types of things. So we'll be watching what happens there in that Michigan story, but even yet another story here. Charges against Debbie Long in Wisconsin. What's going on with this Medicaid fraud case?
Yeah, so this is another story, another Medicaid fraud story of nearly $2.2 million, where this Milwaukee woman allegedly took the funds for basically a money laundering scheme, fraudulent transactions that she filed to receive taxpayer funding for. And then went on and bought a car wash, a new car, Kids Frozen Custard in Milwaukee. So we see this instance of taxpayer funding going directly into buying these businesses for this woman for services that she never actually was giving to people in the community.
It almost sounds like an episode from Breaking Bad where they're getting illicit money and they're going out and buying car washes
exactly
to set up a money laundering operation.
And the funniest thing about it is her lawyer called it an obvious clerical error, but not fraud. So
yeah, I saw a line in that story about like 13,000 hours billed in one day or something like that. It's just, I don't know. When you see these types of numbers and the types of things that, again, a Mercedes-Benz, a car wash, a custard store, these types of things being, used with allegedly your tax dollars, and the accountability there needs to obviously be transparent and above board.
And that's really why the Trump administration has kind of declared this war on fraud. And there seems to be a lot better relationship between the federal and the state governments, or even just independent investigators. There's a report made, recently there was a report in Ohio about some potential fraud there, and right away, Vice President J.D. Vance was like, we're gonna jump on that and see what's going on there. So it seems like maybe this administration is more responsive to these reports of fraud.
And appointed U.S. attorneys across the country from the federal government, from the Trump administration and the Department of Justice, clearly being given a certain type of order. Get out there and find this fraud. Let's hold people accountable. And we'll definitely be reporting on that here at the Center Square. Elise Apel with the Center Square. Greatly appreciate your time today. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. Republican authors of a voter identification ballot initiative in California said Thursday the measure's progress toward the November 3rd ballot is the fastest volunteer qualified initiative in California state history. The Center Square California reporter Madeline Shannon reports the remarks come on the heels of the initiative qualifying for the ballot after the measure's supporters submitted more than the required number of valid signatures. That's more than 1 million signatures, significantly over the 874,000 required. California State Senator Tony Strickland said they're not trying to reinvent the wheel here, as 36 other states have already implemented such things. He says they have higher voter turnout because of it. Democratic lawmakers told the Center Square Nothing when they were reached out to for comment on that particular measure. New York Governor Kathy Hochul and Democratic legislative leaders agreeing to a tentative $268 billion budget that includes money to bail out New York City, an overhaul of the state's auto insurance industry, and restrictions on police cooperation with ICE, despite threats of a federal crackdown. Now, the Center Square contributor Chris Wade reports the handshake agreement announced Thursday increases state spending by more than 5.5% over the current fiscal year. It also includes plans to expand housing production, roll back the state's aggressive climate change mandates, and eliminate the state income tax on tips. It comes more than a month after the state's April 1st deadline to approve a spending plan. Lawmakers blew past that deadline and have enacted 9 interim budgets to keep the government open as talks dragged on. Last year, lawmakers approved a $237 billion budget. That was more than 2 weeks late. Louisiana regulators grappling with how to power a wave of large-scale industrial power usage without shifting the cost onto existing customers as demands for electricity surge alongside economic development efforts. Now, the issue took center stage Thursday at a Louisiana Public Service Commission technical conference where regulators, utilities, and staff debated whether the state needs clearer rules for large electricity users such as data centers and heavy industry. The Center Square Louisiana reporter Nolan McKendry reports that the push comes as Louisiana courts major investment from power-intensive projects, including data centers, natural gas plants, and steel mills. Those facilities require substantial electricity, raising questions about how utilities can meet the demand while shielding current ratepayers from higher costs. And Pennsylvania seeks to meet growing electricity demands without burdening ratepayers. Lawmakers there looking to technology to help make the most out of the existing power grid. The Center Square contributor Lauren Jessup reports House Bill 2223, sponsored by Democratic State Representative Elizabeth Fielder, passed the House unanimously on Monday in Pennsylvania. That bill would require utilities to evaluate the use of advanced transmission technologies, or ATTs, when planning new transmission projects. ATTs include a suite of hardware and software tools designed to increase the capability and capacity and flexibility of both existing and new transmission lines. Supporters say the technologies can help expand grid capacity, improve reliability, reduce congestion, and help contain costs for homes and businesses. Similar legislation has been enacted in 5 other states as part of the PJM region. And that's just some of what America is talking about. Get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. Join us back here Monday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, all around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.